B. Wells Barnett was born a slave in Mississippi in 1862 who grew up to be a schoolteacher, editorial, and most notably, an activist who argued against lynching. Her essay condemning the lynching of 3 black men led to an angry mob destroying her newspaper in the Memphis Free Press. However, after she moved to the North, she became a leading figure in the anti-lynching crusade. At one point, she outright stated that she believed the U.S. had no right to call itself the land of the free due to the conditions African Americans living in the South had to face. Booker T. Washington advocated more for industrial education and economic self-help for his people, rather than fighting segregation. He believed that obtaining farms or skilled jobs was much more important to African Americans than rights of citizenship. His success was built on both channeling aid to help the Tuskegee Institute, which he headed, and black politicians and newspapers supporting his program, as well as the black community starting more and more to believe that attacking segregation was nigh impossible, and they should instead focus on building up their own communities. The versus Ferguson case began when a legislator in Louisiana began ordering railroad companies to make separate cars or sections for black passengers. Black citizens of New Orleans then assembled to challenge that law, prompting a test case when Homer Plessy, a light-skinned African-American, was arrested for refusing to follow a conductor's order to move to the colors-only section in a railroad car. The case was then taken to the Supreme Court, where the Albion W. Torgee, a North Carolina judge who fought against the Ku Klux Klan during the Reconstruction period, was made the judge. Unfortunately, the decision ended in an 8-to-1 ratio, allowing Louisiana to uphold its law. Soon enough, it led to allowing segregation in Southern society in nearly every aspect of it, on the justification that it wasn't discrimination, so long as they were separate but equal. In 1983, the Supreme Court invalidated the Civil Rights Act of 1875, outlawing racial discrimination by public facilities in the civil rights cases. They claimed that while the 14th Amendment prohibited unequal treatment by state authorities, it did not apply to private businesses. This would go on to play a part in the Plessy versus Ferguson case.
As the Chinese experienced a population boom, many started migrating into the U.S. in mass numbers. However, tensions started to build as Americans began blaming the Chinese immigrants for their unemployment and decreasing wages. The U.S. never expected the Chinese to stay, as they were expected to act like guest workers and return home when they saved enough money. When they didn't return home, the U.S. citizens became worried that the Chinese would take over all their jobs due to their low wage. As a result, on May 6, 1882, President Chester Arthur signed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned all Chinese immigration to the U.S. for 10 years.
In 1893, the Supreme Court authorized the deportation of Chinese aliens without due process of law in Fong Yuting. It was yet another example of Congress setting racial restrictions on immigration. Of course, the law went on to also apply to other groups deemed undesirable, such as barring anarchists from entering the U.S. in 1904.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was an American social activist, abolitionist, and a leading figure of the early women's rights movement. She held the Seneca Falls Convention in July 1848 with Lucretia Mott, which proposed that women be granted the right to vote. Frances Willard was an American temperance reformer and was one of the founders of the Women's Christian Temperance Movement. This organization advocated for the prohibition of alcohol. With her strong beliefs and determination, it became one of the largest women's organizations of its time. One of their well-known accomplishments was the passage of the 18th Amendment, which stated that the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof into or the exportation thereof from the United States and all of the territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. The founders of the National American Woman Suffrage Association include Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and Carrie Chapman. They aimed to pass women's suffrage legislation at the state and local level. Their strategy was to push for suffrage at the state level, believing that state-by-state support would eventually force the federal government to pass the amendment. During World War I, the association supported the war effort and lauded women's role in the Allied victory, which helped to finally achieve nationwide women's suffrage in the 19th Amendment.